this.
This meeting is
So this was from a month or so ago. I was just sitting down with the Saturday papers, not even the hard-hitting papers, but the weekend papers. And I just started cutting out headings. And, we're dealing with so much more now than just a global pandemic. And I don't know if it's the onset of this pandemic, but since then, we seem to have had a plethora of disruptive events and conditions that we seem to be besieged by. A war across the other side of the planet really is having significant impact on the lives of everyday Australians. Some of these events, that even those clippings aren't confined to, as the ongoing impact of COVID, the war in Ukraine, climate change, climate emergency, the supply chain crisis, escalating energy costs, inflation. I heard on the news today, when I was only half listening, that 1 in 4 families in Australia are skipping a meal per day to save on costs. And that's just, it's unheard of and indeed heartbreaking. So we've got all this political upheaval, political, social, economic upheaval, and it just seems to go on and on and on. So what we're curious about in this dialogue is to engage you in a thinking session around this disruption and volatility in our organisations, the ones that you're part of or the ones that you consult to, and to kind of ponder, with all of this disruption and volatility, are we regressing or progressing? Because nothing ever stays the same. Are we evolving or devolving? So that's the context for today. I'm going to hand you over to John, who's going to set you up in thinking pairs and explain that process, and then we'll rock and roll. Thanks, John.
Deb, thank you. Excuse me, I have a croaky throat because of hay fever, so I'm sorry. Creating a thinking environment. We're going to use the work of Nancy Kline, where you two work extensively. We're going to use part of it today to get the best thinking we possibly can from everybody on our meeting. And in the thinking pairs. And Nancy says the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of the thinking we do first. And that depends on the way we treat each other while we're thinking. And we need to be able to understand how to help others think and think well. So the thinking pairs, one of the things that Nancy encourages to have happen. And there are 3 components. There are a total of 10 components in the thinking environment. The first 3 are attention, equality, and ease. And what that means is we pay the fullest attention we possibly can to the other person when they're thinking out loud. We call it generative attention. Our attention is so much focused on what they're saying out loud for us that in fact we generate their capability to think even further than they thought they could. The equality side of it is extremely important because it says we're going to treat you as, I am going to treat you as a thinking peer, but I'm not going to interrupt you while you're talking, right? And I'm going to give you equal time. And the ease is to let the person know the first 2, so that in fact they get rid of that internal urgency to rush and say things quickly because they know they're going to get interrupted. So each pair will get a question they need to think about, and each pair will use the thinking pair process, which I'll explain in a moment, to listen attentively to each other's thoughts. Before you start, you're going to have to nominate one of the 2 to start with, who will come back and give us some feedback at the end of the 8-minute thinking process. So here's the process. You'll get your question and have a moment to think about it and select which partner out of the thinking pair will feed back the first time, because the other partner will feed back the second time. There are 2 rounds. You'll have 4 minutes per person to think out loud your thoughts on your question. Now, watch the screen because you'll be advised when the 4 minutes is up. Finish your sentence, don't just stop mid-sentence. Finish your sentence and then become the listener. Now, when you finish your sentence, please don't make the sentence go on for another minute, because what you're saying there is what I've got to say is more important than what you've got to say. It's about equal time, but finish your sentence. Focus on the thinker as the listener, focus on the thinker and their thoughts. Stay with the person so they know that you are with them and you're not going to interrupt them. There are no interruptions and there's no rebuttal. So if you're second in the first process, the first round, you're not going to say, I disagree with you. That isn't what this is about. It's about listening to the other's perspective. What are their thoughts around this question? And I'll now think out loud and give you my thoughts around this question. And as the bottom line says, that the most potent thing you can do when listening to somebody is to do those things. The question we're asking today is how are we responding and adapting to these unrelenting VUCA conditions? There's an assumption in there. And that assumption is you know what VUCA means. Anyone not know what VUCA, not heard about what VUCA? Thanks, Marianne. It's the volatility, the uncertainty, the chaos and the complexity, and the ambiguity that we're faced with today. We've always had it, but today it's just extreme. And it's, as the word says, unrelenting. We're trying to deal with that in every facet of our life at the moment. So here are the questions. Pair one, Colin and Marianne, what has been the impact of these disruptive events on organisational strategy, structure and processes as you see them? Question two, which will be for Caroline and myself, how have these disruptive conditions impacted organisation culture, team dynamics, relationships, trust, language, organisation stories, shared purpose and values? Question three, which is for Mike and Chloe. Given these disruptive conditions in organisational life, what have you noticed about individual perspective, mindsets, worldviews and values? That's personal value. And question four, Deb and Kylie, what are you observing about the capability, skills and behaviours of individuals in managing or coping with these disruptive conditions? Okay, so if you haven't taken a note of them yet, take a photo of the screen at the moment so that you've got the questions. You can just keep them there. Okay, are we ready to go?
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll put you into breakout rooms in a few moments. Chloe, I will join you last because I'm running the tech. So just give me a couple of seconds. And then you'll have about a minute to orientate yourself, and then you'll be into it. You'll have your full 8 minutes, and then about halfway through, I will come in and just remind you to change speaker. So here we go. Hi, Chloe.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. It's really nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Well done on the new job. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good change.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Hey, before we jump into this, how are you traveling?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, yep. Looking forward to the end of the year. Been a big year, one way or the other, but everybody's the same, I think. So, yeah. Get free tickets to the tennis, though, I bet.
I do, but I've also got to work, so relentless. But yeah, it's true. There's definitely perks.
So let's get into it. So, do you
Would you like to talk first?
I'll talk first if you like. Yep. And maybe you feedback the first time, and I'll feedback the second time.
Sounds great.
Okay. So, boy, oh boy, what do I notice about individual mindsets, perspectives, et cetera, et cetera? Look, I think that at the end of 2022, when I think about the individuals that I interact with in all the different walks of life, in organisational life, I think that there's a very, I don't know, interesting phenomenon going on about this challenge of, how do I say it? Being able to say something and do something in an organisation, freedom of speech, for want of a better word, and at the other end of the continuum, the extent to which I could be criticised for not saying something that's politically correct. And so I've been working in the education system. I think Deb might have told you that I've been working in the Wesley College sports program most of this year. And in the education system, it's really interesting watching how the current, I don't know, socio-cultural environment impacts on what people say or don't say and how they go about saying it and so on. So I think that's been a really interesting phenomenon. I think that there is a level of, I was going to say anxiety that exists across the individuals that I come across. I've been working in businesses where, you know, the impact of, say, the Ukrainian war has had direct influence on them. So, for example, Ukraine, as you probably may know, they're, you know, largest exporter of wheat. One of my clients was Farm Pride Eggs. They, their cost of their product went up, in terms of purchasing, went up like 200%. And so the stress that that event, which is one of many, has put on people across the board has been extraordinary. And then, you know, the extent to which people feel free to say what they want to say and all those sorts of things has been an interesting phenomenon, right? And so I think that what I notice is that what I'm hoping is that as we come into 2023, and I don't know whether this will actually happen, as COVID becomes less and less of a thing, there is a relaxation, like a deep breath. We come out of 2022, because if you remember, we went into 2022 still in COVID. The war hadn't started. You know, some of those things hadn't impacted on us. But then, you know, the war in Ukraine hit, and I don't think anybody really, other than saying that's pretty poor, really understood the impact that it had across the globe, which is, you know, oil prices, power prices. It's just been up and up and up. And I think that hopefully 2023 lends itself to doing something a little bit more relaxed. That's my observations anyway.
Love it. Do you feel like that's come to a natural end, or would you like to elaborate?
No, I'm done, and we're changing over the speakers now, so you go now.
There you go. That's such food for thought. I share those observations and concerns, actually. I'm probably going to go down a slightly different route in terms of, you know, individual worldview and values and that sort of thing. I think that we're still feeling the repercussions of 2020 and what lockdown did to us. And I definitely see a lot of people seeking connection to meaning, or seeking meaning and seeking connection to others. So I know we kind of had that knee-jerk, you know, big resignation. I think that's still alive in people. So something I'm seeing with my fresh eyes in a new organisation is people seeking a sense of belonging and looking for it perhaps in places they wouldn't have previously. So I definitely see in my new organisation a lot of identity being linked with the work community and wanting to really acknowledge shared values with the people that you work with. And I think much more of a sense that work is a part of the whole and not that kind of, like, I'm hearing a lot less reference to things like work-life balance and much more awareness that work is part of life. and wanting and a willingness to incorporate work into your life as well. So that kind of wanting to be connected to the purpose of the organisation, wanting to be connected to the people in the organisation and feel a part of something and feel proud. And that's an important element of meaning. I definitely hear a lot more conversations between people about their life outside of work. So there's a lot more comfort and it's almost like that acceptance of bringing yourself to work is genuine now. Whereas I feel like that there used to be a lot more tokenistic mentions of bring your whole self to work, which kind of meant, you know, talk lightly about a hobby you might have in a very safe way. Whereas I see people speaking a lot more deeply about the anxieties that they might be feeling as a result of these conditions, a lot more frank conversations. And I think that is as a result of the last couple of years. I think we had to prioritise mental health and well-being, and that is still part of our lexicon and part of the way we engage with each other. So I see a real thirst for meaning and a need for connection. But yes, I've experienced firsthand what you were talking about with that tension and, you know, being politically correct, that kind of, you know, will I be criticised, you know, and it's really challenging.
Yeah.
So I think what you were saying there was really, really rich.
Yeah. Anything else to say, Chloe?
There's always so much to say, but I think that's my initial thoughts. Truth is, Michael, I'm tired today. I feel really tired. My brain's not firing as it normally would. So I'm feeling a bit like, I'm really interested in the topic, but I'm also not as available as I normally would be.
Well, it's December the 1st, Chloe, so you're allowed.
Just the first day of a marathon.
Yeah, well, we've got, what is it? Someone said we got, someone I was talking to last week said, we got 21 days to go. He's ticking them off one at a time.
Oh, no.
You know,
That's
so
a terrible way to think about it.
I think it's a bit like that, right? I think it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're just about done. So I need to close the room. So we'll see you back in there and you'll provide the feedback. Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Terrific. Thanks.
This meeting is being recorded.
Just maybe leave it on, Michael, do you reckon?
Yep. Yeah.
You ripped us out.
Sorry.
Yes, it's an awful feeling, isn't it? Being wrenched away from the safety of the breakout room.
We're back, Caroline. Well, so we're all back, Deb.
All right. Okay, so I can't quite see one. Is John back in the room as well?
Yep, everyone's here, Deb.
Okay.
We're all good to go.
All right. Let's rock and roll. So let's hear from, as long as you can see my screen, let's hear from Marianne and Colin, and who is, which one of you is feeding back to tell us what you were thinking and talking about with regard to these disruptions on strategy, structure and processes. And John, if you could do the timing for me, that would be super. Oh,
yeah, just tell me when to shut up because I'll go forever.
You've got 2 minutes, so tell your brain
Okay.
you've got 2 minutes to feedback, and John will make some movements.
So Colin and I definitely both reflected on the quality of leadership as being really important for organisations from COVID in terms of problem solving. I think we both reflected, particularly Colin mentioned about being the challenge of being reactive rather than proactive and the differences that makes. Both of us reflected on the continuing supply challenges that are out there. But I think it was interesting that Colin talked about being inclusive or communicating with your suppliers in terms of just how important it is they have a remit in terms of customer care and customer connection later. And quality.
No,
and
please,
so
you're interrupting.
And so it was important to have suppliers understand that, so that they knew why it was that the deadlines were important in terms of having available product. He talked about that they've got some commitments where there's like 24-hour turnarounds, et cetera. So I thought that was interesting in terms of really reaching into your supply chain to have those conversations and have them understand what it is that you do. He also talked about the labour issues and the overall cost, having a wider view in terms of the overall cost when you're using labour hire companies, et cetera. That in the end, what's your total cost when you have to do a lot of employment activities around that? And was it were these the best solutions? I reflect a little bit, we're in the automotive business and we're still supply constrained. And I talked about how the structural changes and the decision-making changes that we made with the imperative of COVID to solve problems, because we are high turnover, low margin businesses. You don't survive very long if you're not actually retailing. And we're in Melbourne, 260 days in lockdown. There was a lot of very different trading conditions going on. And we reflect now, we need to not lose some of that imperative now that we had during the peak COVID, because we were a much better team. And you can see some fracturing now every now and then where people forget that and they're much more interested in their own individual goals rather than understanding the key mission that we're on together and how the total team contributes to that.
Thanks, Marion.
Yeah, thank you. So let's move around to question 2 for pair 2, John and Caroline, which was around organisational culture.
Yeah, I'm the nominated spokesperson.
Thanks, Caroline.
John and I agreed on a number of things, that things are changing. And John and I are both old people, so we have a long history from which we're looking at culture. And what we have seen is a lot of changes, from the word culture not being understood to being a jargon word to becoming, the favorite of the scapegoat for everything after the Royal Commission. But both John and I also agreed that COVID basically disrupted and interrupted the cultures and changed cultures, not always for bad, because what John observed was that a lot more people, especially introverts, were actually talking now, whereas before in the office they may not have. But he also talked about, and I agree, that it has had a massive impact on leadership in organizations, that they've seen that it hasn't badly affected productivity, and that what is happening is that the idea, the concept of trust is increasing, and that there are areas of improved culture. However, one of the things that we both notice is that since COVID, there has been a pushback, the I'm not coming back to the office, working from home pushback. And the old style leadership that is trying to hang on to old style cultures are having a problem with that, but that there are emerging leaders that are looking to see how to restructure, how to do things, how to develop a culture so that they can take advantage of these changes. So there is a tension between the old and the new. From my perspective, I think what happened was COVID plus technology has supercharged disruptive change. And what is it actually disrupted? The notion, philosophically, of how we work. How do we work? And I said to John, not since caveman era, when a few, cavemen banded together and found that collective working together was better at bringing home the Tyrannosaurus Rex, there hasn't been such a massive disruption to the notion of how we work and organize ourselves together to do better.
Thanks.
Thanks, Caroline.
But what has to die? Sorry, John,
Thanks, Caroline. Time.
can I just put one more statement in?
Yep.
What has to die is the notion of how power, authority, and control goes from structural power to more individual power now. So the whole notion of power is what's being also disrupted. That's it. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Caroline. Let's move round to Chloe and Michael, who were talking about individual perspective, mindsets, worldviews, and values. What did you talk about?
It's a lovely segue, actually, Caroline, to end on that structure. From structure to individual. We had a really interesting conversation. Michael started by talking about that tension between freedom of speech and that sense of potentially being criticised for something being said that could be seen as un-PC. I guess my own word for that would be looking at cancel culture and the tension that can exist in that. And the cultural environment having an impact on what people feel they can or can't say. So what are our cultural norms? And that there's been a big shift in that significantly, as a result of COVID. The other thing Michael talked about was our anxiety, and the anxiety caused by, particularly we focused in on the war in Ukraine. And Michael gave a great example of the impact on costs and how that's needed to be managed and what that's done in terms of levels of anxiety. And hoping to see, I love that you snuck in a hope for the future, Michael, even though we were talking about the impact, was that sense that next year, 2023, as COVID and its impacts fade, that there may be a relaxation and that maybe some of these tensions may actually disperse. That's my own words again, Michael, but I hope I've understood that in the way you intended. I shared those feelings about that tension between freedom of speech and self-censorship, or being censored by others. But I tended to focus on the impact I've seen in terms of the role work is playing in people's lives and the move away from those ideas of work-life balance to work being one component of a whole. And I'm definitely seeing that need for people to connect with organisational purpose and need to be aligned with organisational values, really seeking meaning and seeking a sense of belonging in a work community. One of the impacts I've seen from COVID and the lockdowns is a lot more comfort in prioritising well-being and a lot more familiarity with language to describe emotions and to be able to be more vulnerable, to talk honestly about how we feel and even where our interests lie. So that was the two aspects we focused on.
Thanks, Chloe. So we're round to looking at individual capability, skills and behaviours in managing and coping with these disruptive conditions. I was with Kylie on this, and so I'm feeding back. And Kylie had some really, really interesting perspectives that we've only just started to hear about in this sprint and the one before. So it felt like there was this new emergence of issues in organisational life. And Kylie was saying how people are using the HR function more, and people managers are having to manage people stuff more so than in the height of COVID. So I think because of these unrelenting conditions, and we agreed on this, that resilience levels are running really low, and the demands to show up to work and work kind of just as hard as we did when COVID struck, but without the adrenaline, is really taking its toll. Kylie said that people are turning up with shorter fuses, more emotive, and there's another kind of us and them thing that's happening that we've been working really hard to kind of dissipate between frontline and leaders. And in organisations like Kylie's, frontline need to turn up. They're public facing. And so they can't do the hybrid work from home a few days a week. And they see their leaders being able to do that. And that's creating some tension and some flow-on effect. And, you know, the other thing we were smiling about is that when we do come into the office, having to get used to being with people again. It's like we have to learn all these social skills again that we seem to have lost. And also we had a bit of a giggle about, you know, people turning up in, you know, less than professional clothes and their slippers. Like, you know, put your shoes back on, you've come into the office. So many more conversations about managing people versus business organisational problems is really at the forefront. And, you know, I was, you know, talking a bit about the need that we're kind of tapped out of resilience. And I don't know what we need to do about that, but we need to do something because our resilience levels are running really, really low. And it needs to be talked about not in as a nice to do, but more of a must to do if we want our organisations to be stable and indeed to thrive. So that's our first round, and we've heard back from each pair. Michael, I'm going to ask you to set the context a little bit for round two. Thank you.
So what we've just done there, and I think most of you will have seen this if you've been part of previous sprints, is look at the issue of the disruptors through the 4 quadrants of the integral framework. And just to reinforce that, you'll see the vertical line from the individual to collective. That talks about the sense of that we are individuals operating in multiple collective environments. And the horizontal line suggests that there is an internal or a subjective orientational perspective we all have, and there is an external or objective perspectives that we all have. And when we put together these 4 quadrants, what we do is we're able to look at phenomena, organisational phenomena, through 4 different lenses. And so our questions have addressed that. So, for example, the bottom right-hand quadrant is around systems, and in particular looking at strategy, structure, processes, operating technologies and market environments. And of course, I think what I heard Marianne say was, you know, the market environment for the motor industry significantly changed through the period of the last 2 or 3 years. If we go to the bottom left, when we're talking about the collective internal, we're talking about the cultural dynamics that exist in organisations. And we're talking about trust, relationships, team dynamics, the sense of engagement, shared purpose and values. And we heard Caroline talk on behalf of Caroline and John about their experience that in the last 2 or 3 years around what's taken place in organisations and where it's potentially going. Chloe and I spoke about the individual internal, that is the individual mindsets, perspectives, values and worldviews. And I think that both of us shared our experience when we're talking to individuals and people, what we're noticing about the way in which people express themselves or don't, as the case may be, because of this this sense of what I can and can't get away with, but also I spoke of, and as Chloe mentioned, the anxiety that people are experiencing at the moment or have been. And finally, the 4th quadrant is around capability, the behaviour, the skills, applied knowledge, practical experience, and the quality of decision-making at an individual level. And Deborah and Kylie spoke about that. So these 4 quadrants allow us to make sense of what's going on. And the thinking sprints, since we started these back in early 2020, have really helped us and helped others get a greater sense of how do we categorise all the things that are going on in organisational life. So the extent to which what we're trying to do from an organisational perspective is to ensure there is, as this graphic here suggests, a spinning top. We're able to keep these balanced, and there's not one sense of one of the quadrants taking over the other, although I think there has been a redressing of the balance on the left-hand side, particularly around this issue of acceptance of mental health issues and cultural dynamics being an emphasis. So the intent of all this is about helping organisations create value, sustainability, and being able to build the well-being of organisations. And certainly that's what we've been on about and still on about. So we're going to go into round 2, and I'll get John to talk about that. John, you're on mute, mate.
Some people think that's a good thing, Mike. Okay. We're going to go into our second round. So second question, exactly the same process as first. So you get a moment to think about that question, and you don't need to select this time. You know it'll be the other party, the other thinking party that will actually feed back. So again, it's 4 minutes to think out loud your thoughts on your question. 4 minutes will be the timing, and Mike will put it on the screen. Remember, finish your sentence and then become the listener. And try to resist that I need to get more out, and try to get it out, right? So it's just a sense of equality. You've got 4 minutes, I've got 4 minutes. So you focus on the thinker and their thoughts, no interruptions, no rebuttals. We want to get everybody's thoughts out, the best thinking we possibly can. So, Colin, Marianne, your question is, how will organisations need to adapt, given the need to respond and adapt to the VUCA conditions between now and 2025? How will organisations need to adapt and develop strategy, structure and processes to effectively navigate these disruptive conditions? Caroline and I, well, how will organisational culture need to evolve in order to ride the waves of these disruptive conditions? Chloe and Mike, how will individual perspectives need to shift and be enhanced for people to find their way through these disruptive conditions? And, excuse me, Kylie and Deb, what skills, knowledge and behaviours will individuals need to develop in order to traverse these disruptive conditions? And I'll just make the point that Mike talked about the integral framework. You cannot work in one quadrant in the integral framework without impacting the other three. It just doesn't work well. Life is it's an interaction between all 4 quadrants and understanding what the impacts are. So let's go into our pairs, 4 minutes each. Back in 9 minutes' time, Mike will give us that extra little bit of time to start and finish.
Yep. So here we go, folks. So I will, and Chloe, I will join you when everyone else is in. See you soon.
Okay, American lady. Should I kick off?
You go first.
Okay, so we're looking at how individual perspectives need to shift.
Yep.
And be enhanced for people to find their way through these disruptive conditions. If we can answer that in 8 minutes, Mike, we're doing really well.
Yeah,
I think there's so much to this, but I think this relates to what Deb and Kylie were talking about in terms of resilience. I think there's been a bit of romanticism about resilience, but I think we actually need to think in practical terms about how we build resilience in our day-to-day lives. Thinking about what we were talking about in terms of that tension between the, freedom of speech and being harshly judged or being cancelled. I think similarly, a really practical approach to inclusion and recognising that we need to seek out the obstructors to benefit our thinking. I think the danger in this type of controlled environment is that we seek out like-minded people to validate our thinking, which actually limits the quality of that thinking. So as uncomfortable as it is to be able to navigate a changing landscape, I think we need to seek out those who disagree and may even be quite angry about what we believe and engage in respectful dialogue to understand that rather than cut it down in flames. I think there's a real need in organisations for individuals to build systems thinking and think more broadly about, if we move this lever, what does that mean over here? And really consider different perspectives, which I guess is an organisational illustration of what I was talking about in terms of inclusion, but to actually think more systemically and think in a more integrated way about how systems work together and the interdependencies of those systems. I know I'm going to another area, but they're all interconnected. So I think that might be driving those behaviours. I think that the seeking meaning will continue and is really valuable. I think alignment between organisational purpose and values with individual purpose and values is real. Yeah, but there's some constraints around that too. But the other thing I think that'll bring people a lot of meaning through instability is connection to community. So feeling that they're a part of something, that they're united with people who are contributing in different ways to shared objectives and being motivated by those.
You got a little bit more if you want.
Oh, okay. Michael, I think there's something, I don't know whether this is something I want to feed back or not, but there is something about things being tangible and practical. I feel like the focus on well-being has encouraged individualism. And it's not always healthy. So that can lead to a sense of righteousness and entitlement. And I think that's an individual shift that's required to successfully navigate those conditions.
That's good. All right, you're done now.
All right. What about you?
I'll just broadcast my message just to make sure people change over.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Okay. Let me think about this. So one of the problems with doing this is I'm trying to do the tech and watch the clock and think and listen to you and all that sort of stuff. So I've got to catch up a little bit here. Boy, oh boy, the next, on the question asked about what do we need to have from a mindset perspective between now and say 2025. So that's, a 3-year period. And I think that certainly the concept of personal resilience keeps popping up. I was with my wife. Did you meet Cinnamon? No, you didn't. You would have heard of Cinnamon though, because Carly Baxter worked for Cinnamon.
There you go. Great.
Yeah. So she did a thing yesterday on personal resilience, and so this topic area is going to become critically important. And I think you're right when you say about, well, how do we convert the commentary around this thing called resilience, mental health, well-being to something practical and something that people can shift and work with without that sense of entitlement and righteousness. And I think there's a bit of that goes around. I have, I'm stressed and I'm this and that. I'm going to take my mental health days. So I'd like to think, and the other thing that, if we think about 2025, is there's a group of people that have moved into the workforce through COVID, and that by 2025, that group of people will be nearly 30. So it'll be really interesting to see that, the group of people that, I don't know about you, but certainly in the workplace, they're probably a group of people we might have suggested were entitled and righteous and all that sort of thing. And, and they are working towards becoming the next generation of leaders, and their perspectives are going to be really interesting when confronted with the next generation, because we're almost in a generational move here, right? And I think that's going to be really interesting, because I've even noticed that with my kids, you know, my two boys, who are one's about to turn 30, one's in his mid-20s and one's in his 24, 25. And certainly the youngest one, his sense of change since the beginning of COVID to now is remarkable. He's actually grown up, and he now sees some of the stuff that a lot of his contemporaries were talking about in terms of, oh, you know, woe is me and the woke generation and all that sort of stuff. He said, well, hang on a minute, we got to take some personal responsibility, some personal accountability. And he's starting to talk that sort of language, which I thought that, oh, I'd never see the day when he'd clean his room up and you know, wash the dishes by himself, not being prompted to do so. So I think that by 2025, there'll be a different generation of people who are moving into middle management roles, who will be maybe have shifted a perspective where the entitlement, and this may be a bigger sort of sense of, it may be a bit unfair, the entitlement generation will be saying, hang on a minute, no, we've really got to push accountability and responsibility down, when they didn't want to take it previously. So I think that's one of the shifts that I think will take place, because I've certainly noticed it in a generation of kids or people, you know, that age group, who through COVID, had to grow up. Really had to grow up. I'm just looking at the time. Yeah. Okay. So that's it. So I'll do this.
All righty.
I'll feedback back this.
It's so hard not to join in. It's a great exercise. I just want to continue.
No, it is a great exercise using the thinking sprint. Had you heard of the Nancy Klein work before?
Oh, I've been to a thinking sprint before, so I did through that. But yeah.
Yeah, but not before that. No, it's good. It's good material. It really is good material. Okay.
Okay. See you out there.
This meeting is being recorded.
So, Michael, are you debriefing this?
I can, if you want me to.
Or I can?
Yeah, all you got to do is ask them to go around the circle. I'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're going to put the...
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do is to hear from Marion and Colin. I think that's right.
Righty-ho.
Colin, you went, Marion, you were first, so Colin, if we can hear from you.
And again, I'll do that at the 2-minute mark.
Okay, thanks, John. Really interesting discussion. I think Marion and I are reasonably aligned on what needs to be done. Certainly, you know, both of us thought that at a strategy level and a senior level in the business, there's quite an important need to remain agile and to be able to change our plans quite quickly, because the environment has become so dynamic. You know, I think in terms of strategy, where traditional businesses have had a strategy and they've clung to a fairly distant horizon in terms of their strategy, probably need to be rethinking that and shortening the time frame where they loop back and review that strategy to make sure that it's still relevant, and to understand that whether any of the facts that formed a platform to that strategy have changed sufficiently for them to revisit that strategy and change it. And that probably is a good segue into structure. It's making sure that that the people who are working on strategy and then also implementing that strategy at a tactical level are the right people. You know, and I think certainly my observation looking around me is that we're not quick enough to examine people and say, right, hang on, what sort of thinking are we getting here? Is this person in the right space? How do we get them into the right space? And then if that's not going to work, how do we get the right person into that space? I just think that we cling on for too long, and the default setting is that they have to fail catastrophically before we climb in there, which we should do to limit any downside. And then also kind of coming in underneath that is the processes where a lot of the processes that we've got are set by default, you know, for example, supplies, the supply chain, and so on and so forth. I do think that with environment, it being in this continuous state of flux and change, examining those processes and tightening them up to keep on reviewing, you know, who's giving us what, can we tighten up on this, and what alternatives are out there is quite important.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Colin. And we're going to move to Caroline and John. I think this time it's John.
Okay, because I've got the clock. Can I have longer?
Power and the clock, mate.
Yeah. Caroline and I are, I guess, in furious agreement about what needs to happen. And I'm going to quote from Caroline, because I think the wording, Caroline, the way Caroline approached it has got a lot of strength in it. And so what we're going to do is, with what's left of organisations after what we've been through, leadership has to actually involve the collective, using the terminology here, in transformation deliberations. And if that doesn't happen, then, you know, we will all not go forward into the future. She said earlier, though, that something needs to die before you can move to something different. And you need to identify in organisations around the culture aspect what needs to die. And how do we grieve about it dying? Because, you know, a lot of leadership are hanging on to the past. Some of that's got to die. How do we let it die, and how do we allow them to grieve and say it's okay that it's died? And then asking the collective again, what do we want for the future, and how are we going to make it work? That becomes critical, right? And you build in the fail-safes that we build into any system we put in. How do we review it, and how do we measure it? How do we know we're actually getting where we want to go? And how do we go back and check that it is working and will continue to work? So it means actively involving everybody in the process in their own way. And if we don't have them involved in their own way to contribute with all those different perspectives, right, and being able to get a coherence around those perspectives to move forward, culture will be extremely difficult. I've just stopped myself.
I just
Okay, I think it's me. So we're talking about how individual perspectives need to shift and be enhanced for people to find their way through. So Chloe was really interesting, because she raised the word that had come up before around resilience, and I think that this word, whilst it's almost a throwaway line these days, is certainly the mindset that we need to be in at the moment. And her words were, we need to get a practical approach to the sense of what this means and to how we include people and be more inclusive. So there's this notion of inclusion and building personal resilience. She made the comment that individuals, particularly through organisations, need to really build their systems thinking capability and get better at considering multiple perspectives. She made the comment around ensuring that people in their organisation are fully aligned to the organisation's purpose. That is, when I say that, the individual purpose and values align to the organisational purpose and values. Because if there's not, then what you're going to get is you're going to get people who are disconnected to the sense of the way forward. I talked about the sense of what I think we will observe over the next 3 or 4 years is a shift in the nature of people moving into middle management in organisations. So those people who went into COVID, let's say in the early 20s, and I've noticed, say, with my 3 sons, who, you know, always into COVID and have come out the COVID experience, and by 2025 will be in their late 20s, early 30s, their perspectives will have shifted and they will be leading the way with, hopefully, a perspective about the way forward and different sort of futures, rather than what Chloe talked about, being righteous and entitled. Because guess what? They're the ones that have to deal with all those punks that are coming into the system as 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Thanks, John. Deb, or who was it? Deb or Kylie? Is it Kylie? Or Deb?
Yeah, Kylie, yeah.
Oh, we're good?
Yep.
Again, the resilience word, yes, has come up again. Deb and I have spoken about how we really think there needs to be some upskilling on resilience. And what does that look like? What does it mean? Does that mean, you know, organisations or businesses need to look at working with some external parties, consultants, about perhaps some left of thinking ideas, you know, out of the square? I know from where we sit in our organisation, our employee assistance program is really vital to a lot of the mental health of our staff. We have things like walking groups, we have yoga on site, we have an osteo. All of those things go a long way to getting people on track in the workplace. I did also say to Deb that we, you know, things like a 5 or 10 minute coffee before you start work together in the morning. You get a feel for people's mindset, you know, how they're feeling, what's going on at home. That's a really good tool, I think, for leaders to have an understanding of perhaps where people are for the start of the day. You know, if they've had a really bad time at home or that sort of thing. So I think training your staff to actually listen and sit down and have some of those group sessions, whether it's a walk, a coffee, or whatever you can make time for, are really important to getting to know your team and what's going on with them outside of work and how they're dealing with the current situation, whether it's something that's happening in the news or, you know, something like a COVID or whatever it might be, or something with their children or something on a much broader scale. Collaborative capacity, we've said, was really important. So again, if in a larger organisation, you know, bringing your skill sets together to see who can actually, you know, come up with some solutions. You know, sometimes people who you wouldn't think might be able to bring something, you know, very different, but that can actually be really productive to the team. And I think that's really important as well. Training in HR for leaders. For me now, training, you know, any new leaders coming through, I think them having an HR component or session on that is going to be vital for how we deal with staff moving forward. Because I know in my role now, a good 20 or 30% of my day is spent on HR issues rather than actual, you know, productive service issues. So moving forward, I think that's something that we need to look at from an organisational point of view.
Kylie, I know we're not supposed to ask questions, but can I just ask what you mean by HR training? What is that?
Human resources. So we have a department where, and that can be anything from, you know, if you're performance managing people and you need to talk to them about what that looks like, or it's if staff are struggling, you know, with themselves, if they need someone to talk to, if they're having some problems at home and they, you know, they may need some counselling or some assistance on how they deal with that, or just sometimes it's just a bit of time out. So I guess they're a little bit like a counsellor. in a way, if I wanted to really dumb it down, and on the best direction that someone should take, or what help they might need, or what assistance the organisation can give them.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, Ron.
No, not at all.
Chloe, that's fine, because the next part of the process, if we were doing the thinking environment, would be questions for clarity.
Thanks.
Well done.
So, John, you're up next in terms of the next round. Is that right? Seb, you're going to. There we go. Precious thinking round.
Yeah.
Take us through that.
Deb, you take in the middle because I'm part of the process.
Deb, you're on mute, Deb.
What we're going to finish with is what we call a freshest thinking round. And so this is a fairly quick round. We're all going to stay in this space and not break out. And as a result of hearing everyone's thoughts, what is your freshest thinking? Not just the thoughts that you heard in the breakout rooms that you're in, but as a result of the feedback process and the whole of the conversation. What insights did you have? What did you discover? Or did something particularly strike a chord with you or resonate with you that maybe hadn't struck you in the same way? You can pass and we can come back to you, but this is a fairly short 30-second to 60-second grab. I'll ask for someone to go first, and then we'll go again clockwise around the circle. So who would like to start us off with their freshest thinking?
I'm happy to.
Thanks. Who did I?
You go, Chloe, because I just spoke.
Yeah, I saw Chloe first. Yeah, off you go, Chloe. So after Chloe, we'll go around the circle clockwise.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I just really enjoyed hearing your thinking. I think what struck me is just the alignment. The themes are really consistent. While that's enjoyable, that's a concern for me too. So I think if we were looking at this type of thinking, we'd want to seek in other viewpoints and people who perhaps value different things to really enrich the thinking. One of the things I guess that's really sparked for me is how do you approach this type of thinking in a way that resonates for people who don't share the values that this group shares. So so thank you very much for sparing that idea.
Thanks, Chloe. I'll skip me and go to Kylie.
Hi, I actually loved the statement, something needs to die for something to survive. Coming from an organisation that has some very long-standing views and opinions, that change can be very long and very difficult at times. So I'm going to use that one in my next ELT meeting for sure.
Thanks, Kylie.
Yeah, do I get a go?
I might get a hat.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. We started with Chloe. I skipped myself, but if you'd like to have a go, Michael, sure.
Thank you.
What would you like to say? What's your freshest thinking?
Oh, well, Kylie's already done it because she's used the same thing that I picked up about something has to die before we move next on to the next thing. And that's a Caroline Shahbazism that I've heard before, but in the context of this time, it's very, very relevant. So, yeah.
Really struck a chord, yeah. Colin.
Okay, a couple of things. I think maturity of people in leadership is really important, whether they do think like this or whether they at one or two levels below. I like the kind of the suggestion of meeting someone or people for a coffee and a catch up to kind of understand where they're at that day. And really, what really struck me was getting people some HR training, because yeah, they are quite serious counselors these days. You know, gone is the command and control, and what's stepped into that is quite an inclusive type environment where you tend to get a lot of feelings that are brought to the table. So it was good.
Thanks, Colin. Marianne?
Two quick things. One, I'm just reaffirming, somebody made mention of the amount of time that you spend on, the people management side of it. I had a supervisor very early on in my career. I'm at Ford Motor Company. I'm talking like I was like 24 or something. And he made the comment about if you're not spending sort of 40-50% of your time on the people, then it's probably not enough. But that's where the game is at when you're in, management and leadership. And then the other thing I was going to comment on was I do a lot of work in schools governance and leadership of schools, and schools have moved on a bit from resilience, because they've had a really, really tough time of the last couple of years. It's been really challenging and continues to be. And so there's far more purposeful wellbeing programs being implemented. And I think that's probably where organisations need to move to, commercial organisations need to move to as well, which is these sort of proactive wellbeing programs, policy, opportunities, discussions, et cetera, for staff, because people are pretty blunt after the experience of the last couple of years. Are pretty run down.
Thanks, Marianne. Caroline.
Well, I think I always approach things from an optimistic perspective, because change will happen, because we're at a tipping point in humanity's collective consciousness, aided by technology, that things are going to be different. But I'm also pessimistic because the process of transformation is dark. And why? There are many reasons, but fundamentally, it requires letting go of power and embracing vulnerability. And that is not going to happen in corporations and organizations without a fight. And I don't think that our corporate environment as it stands today is equipped.
Thanks, Caroline.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
John, did you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's just two things. A number of things struck a chord with me and resonated. One of them, same as Colin, was Kylie's 5-minute coffee before the start of work, just to sense where people are at, and which is interesting because I do it with my partner every morning. We have a coffee and talk about where we're at. And the other one I come back to is because it's something that I had done many years ago and completely forgotten about till Caroline raised it, is that something needs to die. But when it does, you've got to find a way to grieve. Irrespective of whether you think it was good, bad or indifferent, it's the grieving process that you allow people to go through that starts to move them forward.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being part of this sprint. There's been some really, really fascinating perspectives. As I said at the start, it's a very eclectic mix of people, and certainly there's been a theme of what we're doing is not working, and as there has been a theme, as Carolyn said, something needs to die. I am an optimist. And I think that in some way, shape or form, organisations that stand true to their purpose and their values will be the ones that will be the phoenix from the ashes, and that will not only survive but will thrive. And I think, guys, one of the things I said to Kylie was that just being in a conversation for 8 minutes, where I get to share my thinking for half of that time, I found really energising. And that collaborative capacity is now not a nice to have, it's an absolute must to have. So good people like us need to stick together and keep having the kind of conversations that we need to have so that our organisations not only thrive, but thrive. And that means that the people in them are thriving as well. So we'll close up. If there's anyone in your organisation that you think would enjoy Thinking Sprint, just let one of us know. You've got our email addresses. You've got Chris's email address. We'll be starting up again probably in February of next year. We've had several hundred people go through these sprints. We want to keep on having these kind of dialogues to hear all the varied and interesting perspectives. So, folks, go well, stay well, have a great break, and we'll be catching up with you, no doubt, in the near future.
Merry Christmas.
Yes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
It was fun.
Bye, guys.
There you go. Hang on, I'll just stop the recording.